In the lesson on minor and diminished intervals, we learned that if a perfect interval is lowered a half step, it is diminished. We also learned that if a major interval is lowered a half step, so the upper note is lowered half step, well, that becomes minor. The full story is that you can have a minor interval and lower that a half step. And just like the perfect lowered a half step, the minor lowered a half step is called a diminished interval. Here are some examples. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is a D, well, that's a major second. If we lower the upper note a half step, that's a minor second. If we lower it another half step, that becomes a diminished second. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is an E, that's a major third. If we lower it a half step, it's a minor third. We lower it another half step, it is now a diminished third. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is an F, that is a perfect fourth. If we lower that a half step, that is a diminished fourth. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is a G, that's a perfect fifth. Lower it a half step, and it is a diminished fifth. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is an A, that is a major sixth. Lower it a half step becomes a minor sixth. Lower another half step, it becomes a diminished sixth. If the bottom note of an interval is a C and the upper note is a B, that's a major seventh. Lowered a half step is a minor seventh. Lowered another half step is a diminished seventh. And finally, if you have a C and you have an octave to a higher C, that is a perfect eighth. Lowered a half step, and that becomes a diminished eighth. A minor or perfect interval lowered a half step is diminished.